When an alarm goes off, you don't need to waste time searching for related metrics. With Amazon CloudWatch, you can now easily navigate related metrics and logs to troubleshoot issues faster. No more searching, just act. If you're managing your compute nodes manually on AWS, on-premises, and multi-cloud, don't. You can easily manage and remediate all of your compute nodes across environments and your organization using AWS Systems Manager.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nareda Ru. I am a specialist for cloud operations, and I'm here to present with you secure just-in-time node access powered by AWS Systems Manager. And today I have my great colleagues that some of you might already know. Welcome to the stage, my favorite SSM trio, all of us, all together. I like to introduce the first one, which is my all-time favorite, Eric Weber, the systems manager guy who knows everything about systems manager. And then Anthony, which I'll let them do a little intro, but Anthony is everything systems manager when it comes to patch and just-in-time node access. So welcome, you guys.
Awesome. Glad to be on. Thanks, everyone. So hello, my name is Eric Weber. I'm a senior specialist solutions architect here at AWS, focusing on cloud operations. Anthony.
Thanks. Nice to be on. I'm Anthony Verlason. I'm a product manager and systems manager, and I specialize in all things node management, particularly things near and dear to my heart, patch management, and recently just-in-time node access.
Nice. Thanks, you guys, for being here. Well, I think we can start by saying we're all relieved and happy to say that just-in-time node access launched last month on the 30th, and this is why we're here today. And so, Anthony, let's start off by talking about, the vision when it came to launching just-in-time node access.
Yeah, sounds good. So AWS Systems Manager just-in-time node access was really the response to customer needs around granting and controlling access to nodes. And just to use a simpler example is essentially you have resources, which could be EC2 instances or hybrid nodes that are managed by Systems Manager. And you can think of them as like a room in your house that has stuff in it. And there's a product that we have today called Session Manager, which essentially enables you to walk into that room and go to that resource and execute commands. And that's an alternative to SSH. And Session Manager has all these benefits like not requiring you to use SSH keys. We actually made it so easy to use that product to connect to the node or to get into that room that our customers responded by saying, we don't want everyone around in our organization running around with keys to any door they want. So just-in-time node access really spawned as a way to create a lock, a door into that room, and then a lock on those rooms and a way for organizations to provision keys to gain entry to those resources.
Nice, nice. So what do you feel like customers would get the most benefit out of using JITNA altogether? And I'll use JITNA as just-in-time node access as our acronym, but yeah.
Yeah, so we can continue to use JITNA. That's our all-time favorite acronym in Systems Manager, or as we like to call it, SSM. So our main customers are going to be those that are interested in improving their security posture and also those that need to meet compliance and auditing requirements. So just-in-time node access is helping customers move towards zero standing privileges or just-in-time access, privileged access, which essentially means they're operating under the premise of least permissions, meaning that you are given as minimal permissions as possible required to do your job. So that's the main thing that we're solving in terms of what companies need. But the other part of what we're doing is we're trying to unlock operational efficiency or maintain operational efficiency for operators while they're connecting to nodes. So one thing is meeting compliance and security, and the other part is actually enabling those operators, those people that need to get access to those resources, access to them when they need it, just in time, which is why we call it just-in-time node access.
So what do we think about like how this ties into the overall vision for Systems Manager?
Yeah, so in terms of the overall vision for Systems Manager, we're really focused on enabling customers to manage their compute resources or their nodes across their entire infrastructure, which includes EC2, on-premises, and multi-cloud. So essentially anywhere where you have the SSM agent installed and that node is called a managed node, we want Systems Manager to be this comprehensive set of solutions and tools that enable you to manage those resources. So that includes directly connecting to a node. That can include other things like executing a command remotely on a node, or a classic use case near and dear to my heart, like installing a patch or patching.
And that kind of is a good follow-up to a question we just got asked. So I'm going to post it is, will there be support for EKS nodes with JITNA altogether? Or how do you feel that this ties into containers, the container story, or customers who use containers?
Yeah, so go ahead, Eric.
Yeah. So I'd say that's really going to pertain when we're talking about like running EKS on EC2. When you are running it in that mode, you can install SSM agent at the operating system level. A more common example would be something like BottleRocket, where you can connect to the BottleRocket host through Session Manager. So you can complement that with just-in-time node access. So you can kind of control who's able to remotely connect to that resource. Once they connect to the host, they can then enter like the admin controller or admin container and start running more kubectl type commands.
Now, Weber, I have a question for you when it comes to what does it really mean for when customers have a multi-account strategy when it comes to using JITNA? How can they leverage JITNA for compliance, as we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, so it's really important, talking about like providing access to those managed nodes and, only granting access when it's appropriate, for the situation. Like what Anthony was mentioning earlier, common examples might be if it's an on-call scenario, your application's down, you might want to allow people to connect right away, but still maintain that access request and store that for later retention or review if needed. So when you are enabling just-in-time node access, you can enable it from a delegated admin account or a DA account, and then just deploy it out across your entire organization. Or you can be even selective, with specific organization units or OUs, as well as which regions you want to enable it across. And then we'll take a look at this in a little bit, but there are some complementary aspects of just-in-time where you can deploy out some of these policies to make those definitions of who can access what resource when across your infrastructure as well, using infrastructure as code.
Yeah, and since we're integrating with organizations, how does this work with, a common question we get is, well, how does JITNA complement, service control policies or already policy or permissions that are already in place within an organization?
Yeah, maybe I'll take the first part or the second part about the way that actually JITNA works with the permissions. So today, as a customer, if you have a start session permission, then you're able to connect to a resource or any resource as long as you have that permission. So the objective of JITNA is that you remove those standing start session permissions and you replace them with the ability to request access to a specific node, which is part of the JITNA workflow. So the way that we want customers to move forward with the product is they're enabling the solution across the organization. They're experimenting during our trial. They're doing proofs of concepts. They're building their policies. And then they're starting to peel back those standing permissions and replace them with just-in-time node access as their approach. And then the second part of that, I think, was the SCP question. I think Eric can take that one.
Yeah, and I think for that, it's when we talk about some of these approval policies, we can write them using the Cedar policy language. So really, where you'll see the most amount of power with JITNA is when you are using AWS Identity Center. So it's like complementing your SCPs by allowing you to place the authorization portion over in these approval policies. So you can leverage attributes from Identity Center, things like what department is a user and what cost center are they associated with. You can use some of those attributes that Identity Center provides, as well as like groups, memberships within Identity Center, to help make that decision of whether or not users are allowed to automatically connect to some of their resources, and establish these sessions.
this all sounds very much interesting, but just like how everybody loves to see things in action, Weber, I will allow you to go into your account and show this how this works.
Yeah, so here we are just logged into the Systems Manager console. If you haven't seen the new experience, that we launched at reInvent last year, this is a new dashboard that is provided within Systems Manager that's going to pull in a lot of different pieces of information. Now, right now, I am just logged into a member account, so a single account, single region. But if I were to log into my delegated admin, we would get all of these same widgets just populated and aggregated aggregate the data across our accounts and regions. So from that single console, you'd be able to see all of your managed instances across all accounts and regions, as well as how many EC2 are unmanaged. But to move over to just-in-time node access, what we've been talking about so far are some of these like approval policies that I've been alluding to or referencing in part. And the first one that I wanted to just touch on is kind of talking about that organization control, which is through this deny access policy. So this is something that customers can define from a delegated admin account, author it within that account, and it's using that CEDAR policy language. So in here, we can make some definitions across our accounts that we end up enabling for just-in-time node access and make that decision on when those users are allowed to, well, in this case, forbid them from automatically connecting. So the example here is to say, if the user is part of the interns identity center group and they're trying to access a production managed node, which is identified by the tag key value pair environment prod, deny them automatic access. Now, this isn't to say that those interns can no longer access any of these managed nodes. They can always go through the manual approval process, and get their approvals as required in order to connect. But this is really just saying, again, we don't want them to automatically connect. We want someone to review it first.
For CEDAR languages, can a customer use more than just tags altogether?
Yeah, so in this auto approval policy, actually, I thought this was a different example, but so in these same CEDAR policies, the schema for this supports several different attributes. Like I was mentioning earlier, some of those identity center attributes that are just pulled in when you are using that, whether that is just attributes on the user or their group membership. It'll also pull in resource tags on the IAM role as well. So just-in-time node access, you can either make your approvers pulled from the identity source of Identity Center, or if you are just using IAM role federation, you can also point to IAM roles as your approvers, in which case the CEDAR policy can reference tags that are added to those. So kind of in contrast to that deny access policy, in this automatic approval, we're just saying if a user is trying to access a development managed node, through the environment dev tag, go ahead and allow them to automatically connect. So in this type of environment, we don't want interns to automatically connect to prod, but they would be allowed to automatically connect to a dev resource instead.
We do have a question on this. With policies, can be defined particular node to access only and other nodes being denied access. I think you kind of touched up on this, but a little more clarity on this could be appreciated, I believe.
Yeah, so if we want to allow a user to be able to connect to a very specific node, like in our auto approval policy, I think we would really just have to use a very specific tag. I think for that kind of like very one-to-one definition, we might have to take a look at what attributes we could dynamically reference, through attribute-based access control, like pull those in when the user is able to authenticate to AWS. They now have a tag that's attached to their role. And if they're trying to access that same resource, go ahead and allow them to automatically connect.
Yeah, and part of our intention, just to add this, the reason why we chose to use the CEDAR language is just the level of flexibility that we have in authoring those policies. You can have multiple statements, different types of grouping logic. Although there are ways that you can have that one-off node access policy support. We also wanted and are trying to drive a way where you can implement this at scale, but with dynamic metadata that you're referencing.
Yeah, and to kind of like talk about the CEDAR policy authoring process, when customers are building out these auto approval or even the deny access policy, on this left-hand side in the editor, there are a few different like sample statements that you can go ahead and just take a look at. So here, if the IAM principal themselves has a specific tag key value pair, go ahead and permit access in that scenario. And you can just quickly hit insert to editor and just bring it right over into your policy statement. So that can hopefully help, speed up the overall policy development process. And then the last type of approval policy is going to be that manual. So we were talking earlier about being allowed automatic access to the resource or automatically approved access. If the user is not able to connect, whether they are that intern that's trying to access that production resource, or they don't meet the criteria of our auto approval, that means that we have to flow through the manual approval side. And there's a few different dimensions that you can augment or specify when you're building out these manual policies. The first one is just going to be, what is the overall access duration? So think of this as, once my access request has been approved, this is then how long I'm allowed to actually connect to the resource. So this kind of goes back to what Anthony was mentioning, providing access just in time for only a short period of time. So here we're just saying, once the access request is approved, I would be allowed to connect to a node for up to 4 hours. And that can be as minimal as 1 hour or at the maximum of 14 days. So we create these policies that can be targeted or associated with our managed nodes. And that can either just be based off of, if I go ahead and hit edit, I could change this to say this will apply to all of my nodes within this account, if a user is not able to automatically connect, or I could keep that specific definition where I had that environment, or I think this was a function database before. And then the last piece is just around those approvals. So how many approvals should be met? So in this definition, you can say there are multiple levels of approvals, or you could also say there's multiple approvers at each level. Here we're just specifying that identity center group of approvers, and at least one user in that approvers group, must approve the request for it to proceed.
Diving a little bit deeper into Mohammed's question. So building policies specifically for critical applications, do you find that is a common use case for JITNA to be able to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where that auto approval policy can really shine. It sounds like if you're accessing a critical workload, it's probably going to be in that on-call scenario or fire call scenario where something is critically wrong in that case. So in our approval policy, we could always make that definition to check if the user is an admin, they're using that admin role. Here we would modify our principal instead to just look for that very specific role and just say, go ahead and allow them access. Again, you could always filter it on that same resource. If your critical workload has a tag key value pair that aligns with that type of definition, you would include that within your policy statement as well. Anthony, I don't know if you wanted to add any thoughts to that as well.
Yeah, maybe the only other thing I'm thinking of is that as a customer, you have the ability to use both auto approval policies and manual policies, but you may not need to use both. So if you want to drive mainly auto approvals and you're sophisticated enough with the logic and CEDAR to make that happen, and you want to strive towards efficiency because you don't want to slow people down with manual approvals, then you can do that. But you also have the option that if you could have manual approval policies to drive an actual human approval for resources that are extra sensitive or based on whatever your compliance and security and regulations are.
Yeah, so now that we've kind of talked about some of those approval policies and when or how users are allowed to connect, now let's imagine that I'm going over to my list of resources now. We'll just go ahead and expand this a little bit, and we're taking a look at one of our dev instances. So if we were in the times before just-in-time node access launched, I go ahead and select connect. I hit start up that session, and it's just going to drop me into this session right away. So similar to what Anthony was mentioning earlier in that kind of room example. So we have the door. I'm able to get in as soon as I want to, whenever I want to. And if I was an intern, maybe I'm going to go ahead and start modifying some things about this application instance. This is just running a very basic web page. So we're actually going to flip over and take a look at our awesome website first. Just hello from the Cloud Operations Show. It is the best website possible. if I were to go back to my resource now, so let's go ahead and just make some changes. So if I open up my index file, in here, maybe I'm a little bit of a bad actor. I'm just going to go ahead and make some changes. It's not the best website anymore. It's actually just the worst. So sorry, any company, but we made some changes to our website, and maybe some of our customers aren't going to be too happy now. And that's kind of what happens, if a user is able to potentially connect at any time. They might make some changes that they should have required an approval for. So that's where just in time can really come into play. We only allow the users able to connect once they meet that approval criteria. Again, whether it's automatic or manual.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, like what Eric did was we would use the term almost way too easy. So just between the new systems manager experience we have, where you can make sure all your nodes are managed, and then you can use session manager on it. With the great power comes great responsibility. So it was just very, very simple for Eric to go in there and make a change in a sensitive resource, and that you might not want that to happen if you're dealing with sensitive information or you need to meet those controls. Yeah, Eric, I think, are you going to go ahead and show the what it looks like with JITNA now?
Yeah, so let me just go ahead and flip accounts. That's just going to take me just a moment.
And while you're doing that, I'll talk through kind of our thinking about the way we approach this. So we still wanted to make this as easy as possible when you're auto approved. So what Eric's going to show you is that workflow, and you'll see there's just a minor change. Something we balanced when we designed and implemented this solution is that we wanted as much of the back-end policy making, that's the administrative burden, to be abstracted away from the operator. So we want to empower the operators to take action as they need to.
Yeah, so if now instead, I'm logged in as Bob, I'm using an Identity Center permission set, I'm connected, I can go ahead and jump over to that same Explore Nodes functionality. And if we try to access that same dev resource, using just-in-time node access, if I try to start up my terminal session at this point, it's going to make that evaluation through those approval policies. It's going to ask me for a reason that I want to access the resource. And when I hit this create access request function, it's going to evaluate against that auto approval policy. And in this case, since that instance is tagged with that environment dev, I meet that auto approval criteria, and I can go ahead and start running commands as needed. Whereas if I were to go back to those list of resources, and I try to access a production node instead, so we got this app1 prod resource. It's running that same website that we were talking about earlier. If we try to access this resource instead, I want to access my prod website. This is again going to evaluate that same auto approval policy. The node does not have environment dev; it's environment prod. Because of that, it's going to fail that auto approval process. And this time, it's actually going to reject it flat out because I don't actually have a matching manual policy. So if I were to go back, I'll do this in just a moment, but I can make a modification, or I can update that existing manual policy, make changes so that users can then go ahead and submit specific access requests. But I wanted to kind of just quickly demonstrate one of those questions I was asked earlier, only allow admins into that critical workload. So here, I'm just rejected. If we want to allow that manual workflow to go through, we certainly could.
I wanted to ask you, so customers right now have their own like ITSM integrations for like ticketing, access requests. How does JITNA fit into this use case, or how does it fit into all the different ITSM solutions out there?
Yeah, I can take part of that. So the first thing we focused on was mainly the notifications. So when an access request is created, regardless of whether you're going to get auto approved, you're going to be in a pending approach, or get rejected, we have built-in notifications for Slack, Teams, and email. But we also create an EventBridge notification that you can use to then go off and drive and create a ticket for Jira or ServiceNow. we don't have a way for you to approve the access request from Jira or ServiceNow. And there's some reasons why we would need, if we chose to solve that problem or we had more feedback from customers, we want to make sure that we're having that chain of trust of the approval itself. But right now, there are ways that you can actually send that notification to other tooling.
Yeah, so using when those manual access requests flow through. So if I try to start up a session against this Ubuntu resource instead, it has that tag key value pair function database. So that was the tag key value that we added for that manual policy earlier. So if I try to access this database server instead, again, prompting me for the reason why, I'll fill it out, create an access request. And at this point, it'll just drop into that pending state. So when these manual access requests are created, Systems Manager then emits an event over to EventBridge, which could then in turn, trigger a Lambda function, which, like what Anthony was mentioning, could then go and query like ServiceNow or Jira. Is there a pending ticket for the requester? If there is, maybe come back and make a programmatic approval, kind of complete the entire cycle. So here at this point, Bob, he's trying to access this database resource, maybe just doing some day-to-day performance changes or configuration changes. He needs to wait at this point until someone from that approvers group makes the decision to go ahead and approve or reject the request. So like Anthony was mentioning, that can send off notifications through Slack or Teams, for those approvers to make that decision.
Now, we covered all different aspects of JITNA, from approval policies and meeting compliance needs. And a lot of customers nowadays go beyond just policies, but also about logging. What are we offering for customers when it comes to their session logs altogether when it comes to JITNA?
Yeah, maybe I'll cover I think there's two parts of this, and I'll cover the first part, and then I'll let Eric cover the second part. So the first thing that we're doing in terms of logging is, now that we have this primitive record called the access request created, we are actually storing who the requester was, on which node they requested access, when or how that access request was approved or rejected, and by whom. And we store that information. You can actually view it there in the timeline. I think right now it's still nothing significant would be populated there, but that's a paper trail in the access request. And then you can see that left tab there called session details, which talks about the sessions themselves. And then within the session details, we also link to other logging capabilities we have for Session Manager, including CloudWatch and CloudTrail. And I'll let Eric discuss those.
Yeah, so within those session preferences, these are going to make a few different definitions, like what is the logging that we want to include. One of the other major features that was added as part of Just in Time that I don't know if we've touched on yet is RDP recording for Windows workloads.
I was waiting for you to bring that up.
So some of these preferences are just defining what is the maximum duration of a given session. So once that user is connected, how long should that session be allowed to continue? What is the idle session timeout? In the case of Linux nodes, we can specify a specific OS user context to connect with, adding an additional layer of KMS encryption on top of the TLS encryption by default. But otherwise, in here we have our S3 logging options or CloudWatch logging options that will actually start streaming out the data as those users are entering in those commands, as well as the resulting output. We can have that information be streamed over to CloudWatch so you can review what commands are being inputted in near real time, for those sessions themselves. And then, of course, there is the RDP recording functionality. So on top of, recording the commands that were entered for those like Bash or PowerShell prompts, if a user connects to a Windows RDP connection, it can record that, and dump out an MP4 file over in an S3 bucket, after the session completes. And then there is some shell profiles, if you need to include like message of the day, or if there are specific commands that need to be issued, as soon as a session is started, those could also be included in those preferences.
I'm gonna little bit of try to talk to you, or try to ask of, like, for having the vision with Systems Manager to be more of a centralized delegated admin view. Now, we've seen it within the account, we've seen the access, but can a customer see all this information in the delegated admin, or is this more of account level basis of being able to see all the different requests, and only you would need to go into the account?
Yeah, good question. I think there are a few components here. So the policies and the access requests, because that's the boundary of the IAM permissions and also the nodes themselves, all those policies exist within that account region boundary. And you can think of those access requests as basically living within each of those account region boundaries. And that's where actually all the calculations are happening about the approval logic. But as part of this experience and the systems manager experience, when you log into the delegated administrator account, we also have ways that you can explore on aggregate all the access requests that were created across accounts and regions for your entire organization. And you can see here, this is what Eric's displaying. So you can see there's total requests, and then you basically have all the associated types of filters. There's some things we include and other things we don't include in terms of all the session details here at this level, but this is really meant to be a high-level view for an administrator or delegated admin to be able to actually just see what's going on generally as they use just-in-time node access across their organization or specific organizational units within their organization.
All right, guys, you guys heard it here. Systems managers moving away from just a regional and account level. We're going to delegated admin and centralized views. Pretty exciting. That's something that's a main conversation we have with customers, right? So
Yeah, and if we were, let me just jump back into those same pages. Talking about like the onboarding experience a little bit more. First, in order to enable just-in-time node access, you enable what's called the Systems Manager Unified Console. And we actually just launched some configuration changes or improvements to that overall process. So you can, when you are onboarding the Unified Console itself, first you can just specify which regions you want to enable it in. But there's also now flexible options for configuring, how frequently you want to, or if you want to enable default host management configuration, how frequently you want to check that configuration is in place. If you're not familiar with DHMC, it allows the Systems Manager agent on those EC2 instances to be able to give permissions to be able to register themselves as managed instances without having an IAM role directly attached. So the agent's able to reach out through the instance metadata service, get permissions, be able to manage, and then you can still remotely connect without having to attach an IAM role directly. It also provides flexibility around enabling inventory metadata or just the automatic SSM agent updates, and you can make changes to those as well. So when you onboard to the Unified Console, you have all of those different configuration choices. And then on the other side, when we were talking about enabling across our organization, if I edit in here, like I was mentioning at the beginning, you can either specify to just deploy it across all OUs, or you could always go with the custom route, and only enable it for specific OUs, as well as which regions you want to enable it across.
Oh, go for it, Anthony.
Yeah, I was going to add that you have the ability to log in as a delegated administrator and adopt just-in-time node access, as well as the unified console experience. You also have the ability to enable that for an individual account region combination. So if you have an account that's not part of an AWS organization, or you only want to test or use these capabilities on a specific account or in a specific region, even if they're part of an AWS organization, you can still enable all these capabilities. And you'll have a flow where you're not selecting the organizational units or the regions, you're just essentially enabling the features.
One other main thing to call out here, I have been showing this process of enabling it, through the managed console or through the management console, but you can also enable, just-in-time node access as well as that unified console using infrastructure as code. So here, in this account, that's exactly how this is set up. If I had to scroll down, just to the bottom, there are two main resources that we need to create. They're called quick setup configuration managers. And this is the resource that's going to handle the onboarding process and building out all these different resources in those member accounts, that build together, in order to enable this functionality. So the first is, the unified console And then below that, we can make that definition on enabling just-in-time node access, and any of those options that we were talking about earlier, which OUs, which regions, what's our identity source, the home region. All of that can be defined as infrastructure as code. So you don't have to go through the management console to enable this. You can enable it using CloudFormation, or you could also enable it from the API using our SDKs.
Knowing that Terraform is a big infrastructure as code strategy for majority of our customers, how does one go about enabling altogether within Terraform?
Yeah, so Terraform also has support for those configuration managers, so you can make those same definitions and include those parameters for it.
I do want to touch on, like, we are talking about requesting access when we need access, right? Or we're eliminating permissions. What are the different use cases that JITNA could be tied to? If it's incident management, if it is, when an application goes down, what else does JITNA touch on? And how can JITNA help other customers when something beyond just setting up permissions and removing those permissions?
Yeah,
Sorry.
I think I'll give it a stab. I'll take a stab at it, but I think Eric will probably have better examples. So I think generically, Session Manager lets you just gain Session Manager is essentially a capability or a tool or a power to gain access to a resource. What you do when you're within that resource, that's up to you and your use case. I think there's more specific examples where that might come more into place in terms of how you operate as a customer. The only other thing I'll add is that we consider Session Manager as a secure way to break a class to a node, but generally the types of vision and approach that we want customers to move forward towards is using automated type capabilities, such as Systems Manager automation, in order to securely take actions at scale. But I think Eric can have a few examples maybe of why you would need to use Session Manager for a specific issue.
Yeah, so I think it would be, typically when we're talking with some of our large scale enterprise customers, they might have some common remediation steps that are performed just automatically. As soon as your alarms for your application start firing, maybe just run some automated response, in reaction to those. In the case of like that website, maybe just try restarting the Apache server. Those are things that we can just do programmatically. We can issue those remotely and just have our procedures return back what was the response. Now, if those were to fail for whatever reason, or we actually need an operator to remotely connect, that's where having that break glass ready to go is very important. We need our on-call engineers to be able to connect right away. We don't want them waiting for manual approval necessarily. We want the application to be up and running right away, so it lowers the overall impact for our end customers. But by using just in time, we still do have that access request, and the reason for it, that makes that full life cycle as far as being able to log that request in the first place.
Now, are you done with your demo? Are you done showcasing JITNA? Because I do have one top of mind question that I've been dying to ask.
Go ahead, jump to that, and I'll come right back. But yeah,
Anthony,
I have one more surprise for the end.
Yeah.
Top of mind question: how much is this? How much does it cost us, or how much does it cost a customer?
Yeah, so just-in-time node access is priced per node per hour. You can look at the pricing on our public pricing page. And we bill for all managed nodes within an enabled account. So once you enable the capability, after the free trial, which we have, which is the remainder of the billing period in which you enable plus the following billing period, then we start charging you per node per hour for all nodes in that account that are protected using the JITNA workflows.
Very nice to know that there's a 30-day trial where you can test this out and see if you meet your needs, and then go based on that to see what estimates it could be. Weber, on to you.
Yeah, so we've been taking a look at the console experience, but of course, sometimes you do need to connect program or, from the local CLI, you might not have management console access at all. So I hope that I actually have the session manager plugin. We'll see in just a moment when I try to start this up. But I wanted to kind of just walk through what is the CLI experience for just-in-time node access. So first off, I'm just starting with making the call that I want to access a resource, providing the reason why, and then just providing the instance ID itself. So following that, I can then go and get my access token. In this case, it was that dev resource, so it was automatically approved. Now I will just copy some of these values for a moment. And at this point, I'm going to be assuming these temporary credentials, and then I can go ahead and start up my terminal session. So if I grab all of these, drop those in. Now, if I have the session manager plugin installed, we should be able to go ahead and remotely connect. So let's just clear some of this text, drop in the start session request. I missed adding KMS encryption or permissions for that. So close to having a flawless demo, but something is always going to make a small adjustment.
It wouldn't be a great live demo if there wasn't no hiccups. So it shows us just how everybody's day is about things. So,
all right, let's see if I can fix this real quick. I just need to make one small change.
if Weber can't fix this, then I will take back your title of the systems manager main contact. It will be revoked.
Oh no, now the pressure's really on. I'm just trying to do it really fast. Give me like 10 more seconds.
10.
Count the
9.
clock.
Just kidding. As you can tell, you guys, we are definitely the trio that loves to make fun of each other because we work so tightly with each other.
All right, we should be ready to go now. I think that was under 10 seconds. I'm going to count it. All right, so now, now that I just fixed some of those permissions, granted the user those KMS permissions to the key that was adding that additional layer of encryption, now I'm connected to that node again. So just wanted to highlight, that just-in-time node access is not limited to, starting up these sessions through the management console. You can use the AWS CLI with the session manager plugin to be able to connect to them, using your local device. Or in this case, I'm using Cloud Shell.
I do think that since we are done with the demo altogether, we are going to be at Reinforce and make some little announcement of us. The trio will be at Reinforce, so if you have any questions or comments or will find us, we'll be in the village, or you can reach out to your account teams to set up a meeting with us all together. We do realize that this could be a learning experience, just as it's been a learning experience for us on how customers would interact with JITNA. And so we are hosting a couple of immersion days and ways for you to enable. So if you have not been to an immersion day, it is pretty much hands-on experience walking through a workshop with AWS provided accounts. And in here, we'll pretty much go through how to set up JITNA or how JITNA is set up, author a policy from the account level, switch over to different roles from the operator and the admin, approve those policies so that you're able to see how that functionality is for your own self. Now, we do have our blog that outlines all the different features altogether when it comes to JITNA. And if you just feel like sharing this with some of your colleagues or friends, we do have an interactive demo, which is the middle column, and that walks you through this whole scenario within JITNA altogether. You guys have any comments you'd like to share out? Eric?
They make sure you sign up for those immersion days. If you are looking for that hands-on experience, like Narita was saying, it's going to be through AWS vendor accounts. So you don't have to worry about making any changes within your own environments. You don't have to worry about spinning up resources like EC2 instances to be able to test out this functionality. It's fully contained within an AWS environment. So you can just log in, get started right away, build out some of those approval policies, see how the CEDAR policy definition really works and functions, and start playing with it a little bit more. So you can then, bring it back to your environment and be a little bit more prepared for what you need to build out.
Yeah, maybe my only other call out is that middle link, the full visual tour, is extremely useful if you want to just have a quick overview of what the product does. You want to share it with your colleagues that couldn't be here, or you need to share it around with your manager to show them what you learned today. I'll say that in general, just as a recap of what we've done sort of in the last 6 or 8 months in Systems Manager, is we now have a unified experience that lets you ensure all your nodes are managed. You can't manage what you can't see. It helps you get those nodes to be managed. We already had Session Manager, which gives you like really efficient way to connect to nodes. And now we've delivered just-in-time node access, which helps put guardrails around that access that can help you meet your security and compliance needs. So we're really excited about this product and the road ahead. It was a pleasure to be here today to talk to you as well.
A little shameless plug, you guys. I know you guys are doing a Reinforce session on JITNA. What is your guys' session on?
Yeah, so we're doing a chalk talk. So we're going to be covering how you can build out automated responses.
The code is GRC333.
Yep. Yeah, so GRC333. So if you want to check the event catalog for Reinforce and register for it. So we'll be talking about how you can automate, responses, in relation to like security incidents, put in place some of those quick actions, that can bring a resource, hopefully compliant again. But also, talk about just in time as well. So if, those automated responses don't work out as expected, or you do need to remotely connect, how can we do that quickly, as well as, be able to log all of that information as well.
And I also added the links to some of those immersion days and a blog on key sessions you should attend at Reinforce for the GRC track. And it also highlights the session that Eric and Anthony are going to be presenting. Thank you guys so much for coming along and joining us today and learning about JITNA. If you have any questions or want to follow up with any of us, feel free to ping all your account managers, and we hope to hear from you guys. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Awesome.
If you're managing your compute nodes manually on AWS, on-premises, and multi-cloud, don't. You can easily manage and remediate all of your compute nodes across environments in your organization using AWS Systems Manager.